The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the cruelest kind of day for a heart to break. Stella Kingsley stood in the doorway of the Dusty Creek Sheriff's office, her hand gripping the wooden frame so hard that splinters bit into her palm, and she stared at Seth Cooper like he was a stranger wearing the face of the man she loved. Because that was exactly what he was. A stranger. A ghost. A betrayal dressed up in a familiar coat and that same slow, devastating smile she had spent 6 months learning to trust. "You were leaving," she said. The words came out quiet, which surprised her because everything inside her was screaming. "You had already bought the ticket." Seth stood on the other side of the room with the railway ticket still visible in his breast pocket, the edge of it poking out like a confession he had failed to hide. His jaw was tight. His dark eyes held something she could not name, not guilt exactly, not relief, something more complicated and more painful than either of those things. "Stella, do not." Her voice cracked on that one syllable, and she hated herself for it, hated that after everything she had sworn to herself, after every goodbye she had already lived through, every dusty road that had swallowed a man she had trusted, she had let this happen again. She had let him in. She had been such a fool. "Do not say my name like that, like you have the right to it. I was going to tell you." When the word came out with all the fire she had been swallowing, after you were already gone, would there have been a letter, Seth? Would there have been some nice, careful explanation that was supposed to make it hurt less? He did not answer immediately, and in that silence, 6 months of her life rearranged themselves into something unrecognizable. Every quiet evening on the porch. Every shared meal at Rose's kitchen table. Every time he had looked at her across the room like she was something worth crossing a room for. All of it rewritten now, all of it shadowed by the dark past she suspected he was carrying and had never fully shared, by the hidden motive she had sensed in him from the very beginning and had chosen, stupidly, desperately, to ignore. This was the moment everything changed. But to understand why it destroyed her the way it did, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to the late autumn of 1883, when Stella Kingsley first stepped off the stagecoach in Dusty Creek, Texas, with 2 carpet bags, a stubborn chin, and a heart that was already half built out of scar tissue. She had come from Abilene, which people in Abilene called a city, but which Stella had come to think of as a very large, very loud wound. She had grown up the daughter of a cattle broker, a man who understood animals and ledgers but very little about daughters. Her mother had died of fever when Stella was 11, and after that, the house had become a place of polished surfaces and careful silences and men. Her father's business associates, her father's friends, later her father's choices for her future, who came and went and left the air disturbed in their passing. She had been engaged twice before she was 25. The first man, Thomas, had been kind enough in the way that a man can be kind when everything is going in his favor. When his father's business collapsed and he needed capital, he had chosen the capital over her. He had not even had the decency to tell her himself. His mother had come to the house on a Wednesday morning with a look of practiced sympathy and a very small box containing the return of Stella's grandmother's ring. The second man, James Whitfield, had stayed longer and left deeper marks. He had been charming in the specific, targeted way of men, who understand that charm is a tool. He had talked about the future constantly, their future, their home, the children they would have, the life they were building, and Stella had believed him completely because she had wanted to believe him, because she was tired of bracing for loss and had decided consciously to relax into hope. He had left for San Antonio on what he said was business, and he had simply not come back. Not a word, not a letter, not the dignity of an ending. After James, something in Stella had reorganized itself. Not broken, exactly. She was too stubborn for broken, but restructured. She had looked at herself in the mirror one morning and made a quiet, internal promise. She was done chasing the shape of something that kept disappearing. If her life in Abilene was going to be a series of empty chairs and unfulfilled promises, then she would build herself a different life somewhere else. She had answered an advertisement in the Abilene Chronicle, a small town in West Texas, newly incorporated, growing fast, in need of a school teacher. The pay was modest. The accommodations were described as comfortable and respectable. The opportunity was real. Dusty Creek was smaller than the advertisement had implied, which was always the case with advertisements. It sat at the edge of a wide, flat plain with the Davis Mountains visible in the distance on clear days, a collection of wooden buildings arranged around a central street, with a general store, a church, a saloon, a sheriff's office, a livery stable, and a schoolhouse that still smelled of fresh lumber. The population was somewhere between 300 and 400 depending on who was passing through and who had decided to stop. The man who met her stagecoach was not Seth Cooper. It was Mayor Gerald Holt, a round, cheerful man with a red face and an impressive mustache, who shook her hand with both of his and told her 3 times within the first 5 minutes how glad the town was to have her. He carried one of her bags to the boarding house run by a woman named Rosa Vega, a widow in her 40s with sharp black eyes, flour-dusted hands, and an immediate, uncomplicated warmth that Stella felt like stepping into sunlight. "You will eat at my table," Rosa told her. This was not a question. "My house rules, everyone eats together, you will meet people, you will not be lonely." Stella had smiled and said that sounded fine, and she had meant it even though the word lonely sat in her chest like a stone she had stopped trying to lift. She met Seth Cooper on her 3rd day in Dusty Creek. He was coming out of the sheriff's office as she was walking past, heading to inspect the schoolhouse for the first time, and he nearly walked into her. He caught himself at the last moment, stepping back, and she got her first clear look at him, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw that carried about 3 days of stubble. He was wearing a deputy's star on his chest that seemed to have been pinned there somewhat reluctantly, like he had agreed to it without quite meaning to. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, and touched the brim of his hat. "No harm done," she said, and kept walking. That should have been the whole of it. A near collision on a Texas street, a polite exchange, 2 people going their separate ways. Except that when she reached the schoolhouse and spent an hour assessing its supplies and furniture, and the particular challenges of teaching children of 6 different ages in a single room, and then walked back through town to Rosa's boarding house. Seth Cooper was sitting on the porch steps of the sheriff's office with a cup of coffee, and he glanced up as she passed, and something in his expression shifted, not a smile exactly, but the suggestion of one, something reserved and careful and curious. She did not think about him again that night, but she noticed him the next day, and the day after that, in the way you notice something that keeps appearing in your peripheral vision. He was quiet in a way that seemed deliberate, occupying the edges of places rather than their centers, watching without appearing to watch. Sheriff Beaumont, a weathered, laconic man named Cal Beaumont who had been wearing the same boots for 20 years, treated Seth with a kind of respectful deference that suggested Seth's position as deputy was somewhat misleading. Whatever Seth Cooper's history was, Cal Beaumont took it seriously. It was Rosa who told her the broad strokes of it, one evening in the kitchen while they were washing dishes. Rosa was a woman who believed that information shared was kindness extended, and she offered what she knew without the embroidery of gossip. Seth Cooper had come to Dusty Creek about a year before Stella. He had arrived with nothing in particular and had not explained himself much to anyone, which in West Texas in 1883 was a reasonable way to arrive. He was good with a firearm and better at reading trouble before it happened, and Sheriff Beaumont had recognized both of those qualities and offered him a deputy position within 3 weeks. He had accepted. He had found a small place at the edge of town, a modest house with a porch and a vegetable garden that he maintained with surprising care, and had settled into Dusty Creek the way a stone settles into a riverbed, quietly and completely. "He does not talk much about where he came from," Rosa said, handing Stella a wet plate to dry. "People have asked. He gives answers that feel like answers but are not really answers. You know the kind." Stella knew the kind. Is he trustworthy, she asked, because that was the actual question beneath all the others. Rosa considered this with the seriousness it deserved. I think, she said slowly, that he is a man who wants to be. That is not the same thing, but it is not nothing either. It was not nothing. Stella filed it away and went on with her life. The schoolhouse opened in October, and Stella threw herself into the work with the particular ferocity of a woman who needs an occupation for her brain, so her heart cannot get into mischief. She had 14 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, a mix of settler children and 2 children of a Mexican family named Ortega who had lived in the region longer than anyone else in town. She was a good teacher, patient, inventive, absolutely unwilling to be defeated by a textbook shortage or a November that brought temperatures that made the schoolhouse feel like a wind tunnel. She started carrying her lunch to the small bench outside the general store, partly because the light was better there and partly because she had realized, somewhat to her own surprise, that she liked watching the town, the rhythms of it, the way people moved through the street with their particular purposes, the way the mountains sat on the horizon in the afternoon like a calm promise. Seth Cooper walked past that bench at roughly the same time every weekday, heading from the sheriff's office to the livery stable and back again on whatever patrol route Cal Beaumont had assigned. He always acknowledged her with a nod. She always nodded back. This went on for 2 weeks. Then one day he stopped. He did not make a production of it. He simply paused, looked at the bench where she was sitting with her bread and her apple and the lesson plan she was revising, and said, "You are the new school teacher." "I am," she said. "Stella Kingsley." Seth Cooper. He was holding his hat in both hands, which seemed to be something he did when he was uncertain about something. "How is it going, the school?" "Better than expected," she said honestly. "Worse than ideal, as most things are." Something moved in his expression, not quite amusement but adjacent to it. "Fair enough," he said, and then he put his hat back on and continued on his way. But the next day he stopped again, and the day after that, and by the end of the week they had fallen into a pattern that neither of them named because naming it might have frightened one of them off. He would pause at the bench. They would exchange some number of words, sometimes a few, sometimes more. He would continue his patrol. She would continue her lunch. She found herself looking forward to it in the careful, guarded way she looked forward to anything these days. Which is to say, she looked forward to it while also maintaining a detailed mental inventory of all the reasons she should not. The first time she learned something real about him was in late November, when a cold front had swept in from the north, and the bench outside the general store had become impractical, and she had been eating her lunch inside Rose's kitchen instead. Seth had come in from the cold with ice in his eyelashes. She had not known that could happen, but Texas surprised you, because he had forgotten his gloves somewhere and his hands had gone bloodless and useless, and Rosa had made him sit down at the kitchen table and wrapped them in a cloth and told him. He was an idiot in the affectionate, authoritative way that Rosa said most things. Stella had been at the table already, and so they had sat across from each other in the kitchen warmth while Rosa reheated coffee, and something about the cold and the specific intimacy of a kitchen, and the fact that neither of them had chosen this conversation. It had simply happened, made them both a little less careful than usual. She asked him where he had come from, expecting the non-answer Rosa had described. Instead he said, "Missouri," and then paused like he was deciding something, and then said, "St. Louis originally. Before that it gets complicated." "Most things do," she said. He looked at her with that measuring, careful look she had been learning to read. "You are from Abilene," he said. "I heard the mayor say so. Born and raised." "Why did you leave?" She could have given him a safe answer. She had safe answers prepared. Instead she heard herself say, "I ran out of reasons to stay," and the honesty of it surprised her, and she saw it surprise him too. "I understand that," he said quietly. And then Rosa put the coffee on the table and the moment shifted, but it had happened. Something had been exchanged that could not be taken back. December brought the Dusty Creek Christmas social. which Mayor Holt organized with the enthusiasm of a man who had very few outlets for his organizational impulses. There was music from a fiddle player named Pete who was better than his instrument, and there was dancing on the rough wooden floor of the church hall, and there was a table of food that Rosa had spent 3 days preparing, and that disappeared in 40 minutes. Seth was there, which surprised Stella in a way she did not entirely understand, because she had assumed he was the kind of man who avoided social events. He was standing at the edge of the hall with Cal Beaumont, dressed in clean clothes with his hair actually combed, which was such a departure from his usual dusty, slightly unkempt presentation that she nearly did not recognize him at first. Then she did, and something warm and inconvenient moved in her chest, and she told it firmly to stop. He asked her to dance at the third song. He crossed the room to do it, which she noticed, which meant he had thought about it first, which was doing something uncomfortable to her capacity for maintaining reasonable distance. "I should warn you," she said as he led her to the floor, "I am not particularly graceful." "I should warn you," he said, "I am not either." They were both lying. He was a perfectly adequate dancer, steady and unhurried, and she had been dancing since she was 8 years old. But the lie had served its purpose. It had made them both laugh quietly, and laughing with someone for the first time is a small and significant thing. She was careful. She kept being careful. She knew what she was dealing with, not just with him, but with herself, with the specific danger of allowing hope to take root in soil that had been disappointed before. She watched him. She watched the way he treated people, Rosa's boarders, the Ortega family, the children who sometimes stopped to stare at the deputy with the serious face and the quick eyes. He was fair. He was consistent. He did not perform for an audience, which meant what she was seeing was probably what was actually there. But there was something else, something underneath the steadiness, a hidden weight she could sense but not locate, a dark past that sat just beyond the reach of ordinary conversation, something he carried in his shoulders in the early morning when she sometimes saw him from her window, standing on the street before the town woke up, looking at the horizon with an expression that she could only describe as waiting. January was when the trouble with the Harlan brothers started, and it was the first time she saw what Seth Cooper was actually capable of. The Harlan brothers, Cobb and Roy, were cattle buyers from El Paso with a reputation that had arrived in Dusty Creek several days before they did. The reputation was not flattering. They had a pattern, documented in 2 previous towns, of underpaying local ranchers for cattle at gunpoint, dressed up just barely enough in the language of legitimate transaction that it was difficult to prosecute. They had avoided serious consequence twice, because the ranchers they targeted were too frightened or too isolated to pursue legal remedy. They arrived in Dusty Creek in the second week of January with 4 men, and a cheerful, greasy confidence that immediately set Seth's jaw in that particular way Stella had come to associate with him, suppressing something significant. She heard about it from Rosa, who heard everything, and she watched from the safety of the school window one afternoon as Seth and Cal Beaumont stood in the street talking to the Harlan brothers with the measured, carefully calibrated body language of men who were drawing lines very precisely in the dirt. That evening Seth came to Rosa's for dinner, which he did occasionally, and Stella saw what the afternoon had cost him. He ate in silence for most of the meal and then said carefully to the table in general, "There may be some disruption in town over the next few days. I would ask everyone to be cautious." "Cautious how?" Rosa asked. "Don't be alone in the street after dark. Keep your doors locked. Tell me if anyone approaches you for any reason that feels wrong." He looked at Stella when he said the last part. She met his eyes steadily. "Understood," she said. She did not sleep well that night, and the reason she did not sleep well had something to do with the Harlan brothers, but more to do with the expression on Seth's face when he had looked at her. The situation with the Harlan brothers resolved itself in 3 days. She did not see all of it. She was not supposed to see any of it, but she heard the gunshot on the 3rd night, a single shot, and then voices in the street. And in the morning, Cal Beaumont told the town at large that Roy Harlan had made a poor decision the previous evening and was now in custody, that Cobb Harlan had chosen the wiser path and left before sunrise, and that the 4 men with them had scattered into the Texas dark. Seth had a bruised jaw and a cut over his left eyebrow that Rosa tusked over with a cloth and some water, and he sat still for it with the patience of a man who understood that Rosa's care was a form of love and that accepting it was its own kind of courtesy. "You could have told me it might be dangerous for you," Stella said quietly when Rosa had left the room. "It is sometimes dangerous," he said. "That is the nature of the work." "Seth," he looked at her. The sound of his name in her voice, something shifted between them, a threshold crossed without a ceremony to mark it. "I am fine," he said. His voice had gone softer. "Stella, I am fine." It was the first time he had said her name, and she registered it the way you register the first warm day after a long winter, a physical thing, something that settled into the body and changed its temperature. February was cold and clear, and the schoolhouse had a stove that worked well, and the children were at a point in the year where she knew all their particular brilliances and all their particular struggles, and she was happier in her work than she had been in any work she had done before. And Seth Cooper was visiting the bench outside the general store, even though the bench was cold, and he had started leaving things at Rosa's door. Once a bag of coffee beans he said he had gotten too much of. Once a small book of poetry he said he had found in a box at the general store and thought she might like, which was such a deliberate and tender thing disguised as a casual thing that she had held the book for 10 minutes before she could put it down. She was falling in love with him. She knew it, and she was terrified of it, and she went on falling anyway because some forces are simply beyond the architecture of caution. March was when he first kissed her. It happened at the edge of town, in the blue hour just after sunset, when she had been walking back from visiting the Ortega family. Elena Ortega had been teaching her some Spanish in exchange for Stella tutoring her eldest son in arithmetic, and Seth had been returning from a patrol of the Eastern Road, and they had met at the junction of the 2 paths, as though they had both been aiming for the same point without knowing it. They had stood there in the fading light talking about nothing particularly important. She had been telling him something about the Ortega garden, which even in early spring had things growing in it that she did not know the names of, and then she had looked up and found him looking at her with an expression that made her forget what she had been saying. "Stella," he said, "just that." "Yes," she said, which was not an answer to anything he had asked aloud, but it was an answer to everything he had not. He kissed her once gently, like he was asking a question. And then he pulled back and looked at her, and she saw something she had not expected to see in his face, not the cautious reserve she had grown accustomed to, but something almost frightened, something raw and unguarded, like a man who has wanted something for so long that receiving it feels more dangerous than its absence. "I should tell you some things," he said, "about where I came from." "Yes," she said again, "you should." He told her that evening, sitting on the porch of his small house at the edge of town, with the stars coming up one by one over the flat land. His voice was steady, but she could feel the effort in the steadiness, the way you feel someone gripping something tight to keep from dropping it. He had come from St. Louis, which he had already told her. Before that, he had been born in Kansas, a place called Harper's Crossing that no longer existed. His father had been a decent man in most ways and a terrible man in one specific way, which was that he drank without limit or compass and became, when he drank, a person his family could not recognize. His mother had left when Seth was 12. She had said goodbye to both of them, Seth and his father, in the gray morning light, and he had never fully understood whether she had left because she had to or because she had chosen to, and the not knowing had lived in him like an unhealed thing. He had worked cattle drives from 16, which was hard, physical, clarifying work. He had been good at it. He had also, during those years, become involved with a man named Charlie Voss, who ran a crew that operated on the wrong side of various legal lines. Not violently, mostly, but not honestly either. Seth had been 22 and resentful and directionless, and Charlie Voss had offered him direction, and he had accepted it without examining the cost too closely. It had caught up with him. Not in the way of arrest, he had left Voss's outfit before it reached that point, but in the way of conscience, which was slower and more thorough. He had spent 2 years doing legitimate ranch work in Colorado, trying to rebuild himself into a shape he could stand to look at, and then he had come to Dusty Creek and taken the deputy position and had been, for the first time in his adult life, at something that felt like peace. But, Stella said, when he paused. He turned his head to look at her. "There is a but," she said quietly. "I can hear it." He was quiet for a long moment. The stars had fully arrived by now, the Texas sky doing the thing it did, becoming enormous and generous, filled to the edges. "Charlie Voss died in prison last year," Seth said. "Before he died, he made certain arrangements. He had family, he had loyalties, he had people who believed he had been wronged and that I was part of why." He paused. "I received a letter in January, before the Harlan brothers. Someone is looking for me, someone who wants to settle what they believe is a debt." The cold of this settled into her bones. "And you did not tell me." "No. Why?" "Because I did not know what I was to you yet," he said, "or what you were to me, and I did not want to." He started again. "I did not want to bring danger to your door before you had any reason to choose it." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Thomas, who had left for money. She thought about James, who had left for nothing she would ever understand. She thought about all the goodbyes she had absorbed and all the ways she had rebuilt herself afterward. And she thought about this man beside her, who had secrets and a complicated past and something looking for him in the dark, and who had kissed her like she was something precious, and then immediately tried to give her enough information to make an informed decision about whether she wanted to be near him. "I appreciate the honesty," she finally said, "even though the timing of it is questionable." "Most things I do right have questionable timing," he said, and it was almost a joke, and she almost laughed. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked. "The person looking for you." "I am going to handle it," he said, "properly, legally. I am going to write to the U.S. Marshal's office in San Antonio. I am going to document what I know. I am going to do this the right way." She nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "All right." He looked genuinely surprised. "You told me the truth," she said. "You have a plan that does not involve running away from it. These are not nothing, Seth." The expression on his face in that moment, she would remember it for years. Something between relief and gratitude, and something else, something deeper, that she did not yet have the right word for. Spring arrived with the particular extravagance that West Texas managed in good years, wildflowers across the plain in colors that seemed improbable, the air losing its bite, the mountains in the distance going from gray to blue-green. Stella walked to school in the mornings through air that smelled of something blooming and thought about all the ways her life had surprised her. She and Seth were not keeping it secret, exactly, but they were not announcing it either. Dusty Creek noticed regardless. A town of 400 people had eyes and patterns, and when a pattern changed, the town registered it. Rosa said nothing directly, but began making enough food for one additional person at dinner on the evening Seth came to the boarding house, which was its own kind of statement. She was happy. It was a particular kind of happiness, cautious and real, and brightly lit by the fact that it had not been easy to arrive at. She had stopped waiting for it to end. She had decided, consciously and with full awareness of her own history and the effort required, to simply be in it. This was when the threat made itself visible. He came in the form of a man named Vernon Cole, who rode into Dusty Creek on a gray April morning on a very good horse, which was the first warning sign, because a man on a very good horse in a town this size is usually going somewhere or running from something, and the something is usually significant. Vernon Cole was somewhere in his 40s, lean and weathered, with small eyes that did their looking sideways and an expression of specific, personal grievance that Stella would later learn was permanent. He was not threatening anyone. He was not doing anything visibly wrong. He ate at the saloon and asked ordinary questions of ordinary people, and was, By all external measures, a traveler passing through. But Seth's face when he saw Cole through the sheriff's office window became a controlled, deliberate blank that told Stella everything she needed to know, because she had learned Seth Cooper's face by now, and blank was not his natural state. "He is one of them," she said, when Seth came to the schoolhouse at the end of the day. She had not phrased it as a question. He answered it anyway. "He worked for Voss," he said. "He was loyal. He was also, if I recall correctly, specifically good at patience, at waiting until a moment becomes right. What does he want?" "To find out if I am worth the effort," Seth said. "I think to report back, to decide whether coming after me in a town where I carry a badge and the trust of the sheriff is worth the risk, or whether I will eventually leave and become easier prey." "You won't leave," she said. Something moved in his face. "No," he said. "I won't." She believed him. She had made herself believe him carefully and with intention, and this is where the trap was set, though she did not know it yet. Vernon Cole stayed in Dusty Creek for 9 days. On the 10th day, he rode out, and the particular quality of Seth's attention followed him until he was out of sight, and then continued for 2 days after, which was something she noticed, and which should have told her something, though she did not know yet what it was telling her. She was still thinking about the relief of Cole's departure when Rosa handed her a letter on a Tuesday in late April. A letter addressed to her in handwriting she did not recognize, which turned out on opening to be from a woman named Margaret Harrow in San Antonio, who was the sister of James Whitfield. She read the letter standing in Rosa's kitchen, and what it said rearranged several things she thought she knew. James was dead. He had been dead for 2 years. He had died of typhoid in a San Antonio rooming house, alone and, according to his sister, broken by a series of financial disasters that had cost him everything, including, she said, his sense of himself. He had not meant to disappear from Stella's life without a word. He had been too ashamed of what he had become to write. His sister had found Stella's name in his papers, one of the very few items he had kept from his previous life. It was not forgiveness, exactly. You could not forgive a man for the shape of his absence when you now knew the shape of his interior life. But it was something. It was context. It changed the architecture of that particular wound in a way she had not expected. She told Seth about it that evening. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she most valued about him, his capacity to simply receive what she said without immediately trying to fix or redirect it. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Strange," she said. "Sad for him, angry still a little," and she paused. "Grateful that I know that it has an ending now, even if the ending is terrible." Seth was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "People leave for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes the reason is cowardice. Sometimes it is shame. Sometimes it is love gone wrong in a specific direction." He was looking at his hands. "The leaving is still real regardless." "Yes," she said, "but so is what comes after." He looked up at her. "Yes," he agreed, "so is what comes after." It was in early May, on an ordinary evening, that she found the railway ticket. She had not been prying. She wanted to be absolutely clear about this later, when she thought about it with the benefit of distance. She had been at Seth's house. She went there occasionally, always in the daylight, always appropriately returning a book she had borrowed, and he had been called away briefly to the sheriff's office for something Cal needed, and she had waited on his porch and then come inside because it was getting warm and the door was unlocked, and the ticket had been visible on the table, just there, open, the edge of it catching the afternoon light like a blade. Austin, Texas, departing May 14. 1 passenger. May 14 was 9 days away. She picked it up. She read it twice. She set it back down with the particular care of a woman who is trying very hard not to smash something. She waited for him. She sat on his porch in the slanting afternoon light with her hands folded in her lap and her heart reorganizing itself into something she recognized, the old shape, the familiar shape, the shape of having trusted someone and been wrong about them. When he came back, she was calm. She was so calm that it frightened her. "Seth," she said, "I need you to explain something to me." He saw her face and he stopped walking, and she saw him realize. "The ticket," he said. "The ticket," she confirmed. He came up to the porch and sat down beside her, which she had not expected. She had expected some kind of distance, some kind of protective space between explanation and recipient. Instead, he was right there, close enough that she could see the exact quality of whatever was moving behind his eyes. "I bought it 3 weeks ago," he said, "after Cole left." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment that felt very long. "Because I was afraid," he said. "I was afraid that Cole going back would mean someone coming with more purpose and more numbers. I was afraid that staying meant putting you in danger. And he stopped. I bought the ticket because leaving seemed like the only way to protect you." "Did you ask me?" she said. The quiet fury in her voice surprised even her. "Did you ask me whether I wanted to be protected in that particular way? Did it occur to you, Seth, that I have spent years being left by men who decided they knew better than I did what was good for me?" "I know," he said. "I know that. I know your history, Stella. That is why you should have talked to me," she said. "Not bought a ticket." "I know that too," he said. "I know. Were you going to tell me?" He looked at her and his eyes held something she had not seen in him before, a kind of helpless, naked honesty that made her want to both hold him and walk away from him with equal intensity. "I don't know," he said. I think part of me was hoping you would find it, because I could not find the words." She stared at him. "That is the most cowardly thing you have ever said to me." "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." And that was how they ended up in the sheriff's office. She had needed walls around her suddenly, an architecture of authority to stand in while she felt whatever she was feeling, and the sheriff's office was the nearest building with an open door. And that was where they were when everything she had been holding in her chest came out, and where she had said what she had said, and where Seth had stood with the ticket in his pocket like a confession he did not know how to make. He did not, in the end, take that train, but the ticket existed. And what it meant was that he had stood in the gap between leaving and staying and had chosen, initially, to leave. That was the betrayal, small and large simultaneously, the specific shape of the thing that hurt. She did not see him for 3 days. She taught her classes. She ate at Rose's table. She slept badly and woke early and sat with her coffee in the gray morning light thinking about the specific problem of loving someone who carried a darkness you could not fully light. On the 3rd day, Rosa sat down across from her at breakfast and said, simply, "What are you going to do?" "I do not know," Stella said. "Yes, you do," Rosa said. "You know. You just do not want to admit it because admitting it means you have to be vulnerable again, and you are very tired of being vulnerable." Stella looked at her. "He bought a ticket to leave without telling me. He did not use it. He thought about using it." "People think about all kinds of things," Rosa said. "The question is what they do. He is sitting at that sheriff's office right now thinking about how he broke something and whether it can be fixed. I know because Cal told me. And because that young man's face looks like a landscape after a storm." She picked up her coffee cup. "You are allowed to be angry, Stella. You are also allowed to be fair." On the 4th day, Stella went to the sheriff's office. She did not have a speech prepared. She had decided against speeches as a category, because prepared speeches were a form of armor and she was making a deliberate choice to show up without armor. Seth was at the desk inside, writing something, and he looked up when she came through the door and the expression on his face was exactly what Rosa had said, like a landscape after a storm. All the weather gone, just the marks it had left. "The ticket," she said. "Did you still have it or did you destroy it?" He reached into his desk drawer and placed it on the surface between them. "I could not make myself destroy it," he said. "I thought that was yours to decide." She looked at it for a long moment. Then she picked it up, walked to the small iron stove in the corner of the office where a fire was burning against the morning chill, opened the door and set the ticket inside. She watched it catch and curl and become nothing. She turned around. "The person who is looking for you," she said. "You sent the letter to the marshal's office 3 weeks ago. I received a reply yesterday. They are investigating. They believe they know who sent Cole. And they believe that with the information I have provided, they can make an arrest." There is a U.S. Marshal named Grant Porter who is already working the case from another angle. There are other former associates of Voss who have been targeted. I am not the only one. I am simply the one who decided to stop moving." "Good," she said, "because I need you to stop moving, Seth. I need you to understand that I am not going to be something you protect by disappearing from. I have been left before by men who thought they were doing me a kindness, and it was not a kindness, and I will not have it." He stood up from behind the desk and crossed the room and stopped a few feet in front of her. "I know," he said. "Stella, I know, I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was afraid, and I chose the option that meant I didn't have to be afraid anymore instead of the option that meant we faced it together. And I knew it was wrong when I bought the ticket, and I know it is wrong now." He paused. "I cannot change what I thought about doing. I can only tell you that I would not have done it. I think I would not have done it." "You think?" "I believe," he said, "with more certainty the longer I stand here looking at you. I believe I would have stayed." She looked at him for a long time. The morning light was coming through the dirty window of the sheriff's office in long, slanted lines, making everything look like a painting of itself. "You are the most frustrating person I have ever met," she said. "I know. You are also," she stopped, started again. "You are also the first person in a very long time who has stood in front of me and told me the truth, even when the truth was unflattering to you. That is not nothing." "No," he agreed quietly. "It is not nothing." She took a step toward him. "If you ever buy a train ticket without discussing it with me again," she said, "I will find a way to be angrier than I was this week, and I was very angry this week." "Understood," he said, and then, after a pause, "Does this mean—" "Yes," she said. "It means yes." He reached out and took her hand very carefully, like she was something he intended to hold without breaking. "I am staying," he said. "I am choosing to stay. I want you to know that clearly and without qualification. I am choosing this town and this life and you, Stella. I am choosing it on purpose." She felt something in her chest that had been clenched for years, not just days, not just the days since the ticket, but years, all the accumulated holding of a woman who had learned to brace. She felt it release. Just a little, just enough. "All right," she said. "Then stay." May became June, and June was the month Seth Cooper officially proposed. He did not make it grand, which she was grateful for, because grand gestures had a way of covering insufficient foundations. He made it honest. He came to Rosa's after dinner on a warm evening when the air smelled of dust and wild sage, and he sat across from her on the porch with his hat in his hands, and he said, "I love you. I have been trying to say that for some time and failing at it, and I am done failing at it. And I would like to marry you, if you will have me, not because it is the proper thing to do, but because the idea of my life without you in it is genuinely unbearable to me." She looked at him for a moment. "That was the least romantic proposal I have ever received," she said. "It was also the most honest. Is that a yes?" "Yes," she said. "That is a yes." Rosa, who had been listening through the window, made a sound from inside the house that was clearly meant to be discreet and was not at all discreet, and Seth looked at the window with an expression of resigned amusement, and Stella laughed, a real laugh, full and uncalculated, the kind that surprised her on its way out. They were married in July in the Dusty Creek Church, on a morning when the heat was bearable, and the wildflowers Rosa had collected the day before from the plain outside town were set in jars along every available surface. Sheriff Cal Beaumont stood as Seth's witness. Rosa stood as Stella's. Mayor Holt performed the ceremony with the slightly damp enthusiasm of a man who genuinely loved his town and all its occasions. The church held about 50 people, and most of them were there. Stella wore a dress she and Rosa had spent 2 weeks altering, a cream wool that had been Rosa's, too formal for the climate but beautiful enough to justify the discomfort. She walked to the front of the church by herself, because her father was not well enough to travel and she had not asked him to, because walking by herself was something she wanted to do. It felt true to the person she had become, a woman who had arrived in this place under her own intention, who had built her life here with her own hands, who was choosing this man from a position of genuine freedom rather than circumstance. Seth was standing at the front of the church looking at her like she had invented the concept of mourning. The vows they exchanged were the standard words of 1883, but Seth added something at the end, quietly, that only she was close enough to hear. "I am staying," he said. "I want you to hear it one more time. I am choosing to stay." She understood what it meant and what it cost him and what it meant that it cost him. "I know," she whispered back. "So am I." U.S. Marshal Grant Porter arrived in Dusty Creek in August, and his arrival was the closing of the last open chapter of the threat that had been hovering over them. He was a large, methodical man with an impressive career and an economy of words that Seth appreciated and Stella found initially alarming. He spent 4 days in town, met with Seth at length, reviewed everything Seth had documented, and confirmed that the man who had sent Vernon Cole, a Voss loyalist named Edmund Pierce, had been arrested in Dallas 3 weeks prior on separate charges significant enough to remove him from the equation permanently. "Your name is in the file," Porter told Seth on the last morning, "as a cooperative witness whose information was materially useful. If anything changes, if anyone else comes, you are covered by the formal record. Write to me directly." Seth shook his hand. Porter rode out. That evening, sitting on the porch of their house, the small house at the edge of town that was now theirs together, that Stella had gradually been filling with the particular warmth of her presence, books and dried flowers and a curtain in the kitchen window she had sewn from a piece of calico she had found at the general store. Seth let out a breath that she understood had been held for a very long time. She sat beside him and took his hand, and they looked out at the flat land going gold in the evening light, and neither of them said anything for a while because nothing needed to be said. "You know," she said eventually, "when I answered that advertisement in the Abilene Chronicle, I was thinking about nothing more ambitious than a job that might give me some peace." "And did it?" he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "It gave me considerably more than peace," she said. "It gave me an entire unmanageable life." "Unmanageable? You are in it," she said. "Aspects of it are unmanageable." He lifted her hand and kissed it, which he had started doing recently, picking up her hand at unexpected moments and pressing his lips to her knuckles in a gesture so simple and deliberate that it undid her every single time. "I will work on being more manageable," he said. "Please do not," she said. "I have decided I prefer you as you are." The autumn of 1883 had brought her to Dusty Creek. The autumn of 1884 found her changed in every way that mattered. She had taught 30 children by now. Her enrollment had grown as the town grew, and she had begun advocating to Mayor Holt for a second room and possibly a second teacher. Holt was enthusiastic, which was the one thing he reliably was. The progress was slow, but it was progress. Seth had been made full deputy with an increase in authority that Cal Beaumont described as overdue, and the town seemed to agree with. He was the kind of lawman that people trusted not because he was impressive with a firearm, though he was, but because he was reliable in a way that went deeper than performance. He showed up. He was consistent. He remembered things about people. He took the work seriously without making it dramatic. They had settled into a life together that was ordinary in all the best ways, the small daily architecture of a shared life, the adjustments and negotiations and private jokes and particular silences that belong only to two people who have chosen each other fully. Stella made coffee the way she had always made it, and Seth thought it was too strong, which was wrong, but she allowed it. Seth kept his boots by the front door in a place that was inconvenient, which was wrong, but she allowed it. These were the negotiations. These were the compromises. This was what it meant to share a life and to be glad of it. She discovered in October that she was carrying their child. She sat with this knowledge for 1 day before she told Seth, not because she was uncertain about telling him, but because she wanted one private day in which she turned the fact of it over in her mind and felt all the feelings, which were many and not all simple. Joy, large and somewhat terrifying. the echo of all the futures she had imagined before this one, the specific weight of responsibility, the particular wonder of it. She told him on a Tuesday evening, not in any planned way, but because she could not tell him anymore, because the knowing was too large to hold alone. He was quiet for a moment when she told him, a full, still moment. Then he pulled her close very carefully and held on. "Are you all right?" he asked into her hair. His voice was unsteady in a way she had never heard from him before. "Yes," she said. "I am. Are you?" I'm not sure. I am very Stella." He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were bright with something she had not prepared herself for. She had expected joy or worry or the usual Seth brand of carefully managed feeling. She had not expected this complete, unconstrained wonder. "We are going to have a child." "We are," she confirmed. "I did not know," he said, "that I wanted this. I had not let myself want it, and now He stopped, shook his head. "I am extraordinarily happy," he said, and it came out like a confession, like happiness was something that required courage to admit to. "Good," she said, and pressed her palm to his jaw, tilting his face slightly so she could see it clearly. "Then we are extraordinarily happy together." Winter settled in around them, and Stella's body changed with the season. A gradual, remarkable thing that she found herself looking at with a curiosity she had not expected. A biological astonishment at what a human body can do when it has decided to do something. She continued teaching through November and into December, adjusting as needed, accepting Rosa's increasingly determined campaign to feed her more than she had ever eaten in her life. Rosa had opinions about pregnancy nutrition that were comprehensive, passionately held, and delivered without any self-consciousness whatsoever. Stella ate what Rosa put in front of her and was genuinely grateful, and Seth ate alongside her and said it was the best food he had ever had, and Rosa said of course it was, and this was true. Christmas of 1884 was different from the Christmas of 1883. The difference was not dramatic: the same church hall, the same fiddle player Pete, the same mayor with his mustache, but Stella felt it in the texture of the evening, in the way she moved through it as someone who belonged here now, completely and without qualification. She was not the new schoolteacher anymore. She was Stella Cooper, which was a name she was still getting used to and still liked the sound of. She was part of this town. She had roots here now, put down quietly over a year of living and working and loving, and they had taken hold. Seth danced with her at the Christmas social, carefully, with a consideration for the new fact of her that made her laugh. "I am not fragile," she told him. "I know that," he said. "I am being cautious out of joy, not fear." "Those are different." "Entirely," he said. "Fear keeps its hands to itself. Joy wants to be very careful with the thing it loves." She looked up at him and thought that this was one of the moments she would carry for the rest of her life. This specific evening, this specific song, this specific man looking at her like she was everything that mattered. The baby arrived in March of 1885. It was a long night and a difficult one, attended by Rosa and the town's physician, Dr. Henry Walsh, who was good at his work and calm under pressure. Seth was at the edge of the situation, close enough to be there, but respectfully removed at the appropriate moments. And Stella was aware of him the way you are aware of a fixed point on the horizon when everything else is moving. The child that arrived was a boy. Seth, upon being permitted into the room, sat beside the bed and held his son for the first time with an expression that Stella filed permanently into her heart. That same complete, unconstrained wonder she had seen on his face when she had told him she was expecting, multiplied by the reality of the small, red-faced, unequivocally alive person in his arms. "Hello," Seth said to the baby very quietly with the specific awkwardness of a man who has suddenly realized he is entirely unprepared for this despite having had 9 months to prepare. "I am your father. I am going to—" He stopped, looked at Stella, who was watching him with wet eyes. "I am going to be better at this," he said, "than the examples I had." "I know you will," she said. "I swear it." "I know you will," she said again. "Seth, I know." They named him Thomas William Cooper Thomas for Stella's maternal grandfather, a man she had respected and never adequately honored, and William because Seth liked it, and because it suited the child's face, which was round and entirely serious for a 3-day-old, as though he had arrived with a full agenda. William Cooper was not an easy infant. He was vocal about his opinions from the beginning, which Seth accepted with a resignation that Stella found deeply funny. "He gets it from you," Seth told her once at 3 in the morning. "He absolutely does," she agreed. "You are welcome." But he was also, in the way of babies that make themselves known from the very beginning, vivid and real and entirely theirs, and the love was enormous and somewhat overwhelming and completely right. Spring came again. The schoolhouse got its second room, which Stella had been working toward for nearly a year, and a second teacher arrived in Dusty Creek in April, a young woman named Catherine Marsh from San Antonio, earnest and capable and new to the work in the way that Stella had been new to it 2 years earlier. Stella took her under her wing with a patience and generosity that surprised even herself, and Catherine proved an excellent student of teaching. Dusty Creek was growing. The railroad, which had been talked about for years as something that might or might not ever be real, was now definitively coming, a spur line from the main route that would reach Dusty Creek within 2 years. The town council, of which Seth had recently been made a member, he had resisted, and Stella had told him resistance was foolish, and he had accepted was already planning for it. New families were arriving. New buildings were going up. The flat land around the town was being measured and negotiated and turned into the future. Cal Beaumont retired in the summer of 1885 on account of a knee that had been making its opinions known for some time, and the town council offered the position of sheriff to Seth Cooper. This was not a surprise to anyone except Seth, who sat with the offer for 3 days before accepting it, during which time Stella watched him think it through with the seriousness he brought to everything that mattered. "It is more responsibility," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "More visibility, more of a target." "Seth, the threat is gone. The file is closed. You are a respected member of this community, and Cal Beaumont has been grooming you for this position for 2 years. The responsibility is the point." He looked at her across the kitchen table in the morning light, with William in his arms doing the thing babies do when they are content, which is to look at everything with an interest that suggests they are studying for an examination. "You think I should take it," Seth said. "I think you already know you should take it," she said. "I think you are waiting to see if I will tell you the same thing." He gave her the look that meant she had read him correctly, and he was not entirely certain whether to be grateful for this or not. "Take the position, Seth," she said gently. "You have been working toward being this version of yourself for a long time. This is what being this version of yourself looks like." He was appointed sheriff of Dusty Creek on the 1st of August, 1885. Cal Beaumont pinned the star to his chest at the small ceremony in front of the sheriff's office with a formality that was his way of honoring something he cared about, and Seth stood in the Texas morning light, receiving it with a straightness in his spine that Stella had never seen before, not military, not performing, just the natural posture of a man who has arrived at the place he was meant to be. She was in the small crowd watching. William was on her hip, 9 months old and already trying to climb everything, pulling at the collar of her dress with a determined fist. When Seth looked out at the crowd and found her, immediately, without searching, the way you find someone you are always aware of, she smiled. He smiled back, and for a moment the whole complicated, painful, beautiful journey of it was visible between them like weather. The fall of 1885 and the winter of 1886 were the quietest and most contented months Stella had known in her life, and she appreciated them with the fullness of someone who understands that contentment is its own kind of achievement. William had become, at a year old, exactly the person his first weeks had suggested he would be: opinionated, mobile, delighted by everything, and exhausting in a way that she found she could not regret. She and Seth moved through parenthood the way they moved through everything, with a combination of her planning and his patience that between them produced something workable and occasionally remarkable. Seth had settled into the sheriff's role with the same reliability he brought to everything. Dusty Creek was not a violent town. It had its incidents, its disputes, its moments that required a calm and authoritative presence. But it was fundamentally a community of people building something, and Seth's approach to law enforcement matched this. He was fair. He was consistent. He was, in the word that Rosa used most often about him, steady. Stella had begun to think about the school in terms of what the next 5 years might look like, what the town's growth would require, what she might build if she stayed, which she absolutely would. This was her place. She had stopped thinking of it as somewhere she had arrived and begun thinking of it as somewhere she had grown. She wrote letters to the state education office. She researched curriculum. She argued with Mayor Holt about funding, which she had discovered she was exceptionally good at. One evening in February, when William was asleep and the house was quiet and Seth was reading at the table and she was sewing ordinary domestic reel, she looked up and caught him watching her with an expression she recognized. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I was just thinking about something." "About what?" He set the book down. "About Dusty Creek in 1883, he said. "The morning you walked past the sheriff's office and I nearly walked into you. I remember." I thought he paused. "I thought you were the most self-contained person I had ever seen. The way you just kept walking. Like you had places to be and reasons to be there, and no need of anything the town might offer." "I was terrified," she said. "I know that now," he said. "I did not know it then you just looked." He shook his head. "I thought there is a woman who has figured something out and I wanted to know what it was." She looked at him. The fire was burning low in the stove. Outside, the wind was doing something theatrical across the plain, which it liked to do in February. "Did you find out?" she asked. "Eventually," he said. "It took a while and considerable effort. And it was worth it," he said simply. "All of it. Every complicated, difficult, terrifying part of it." He paused. "I love you, Stella. I know I say it. I want to make sure I say it in ways that mean something, not just in the automatic way." "It always means something," she said quietly. "Good," he said. "I want it too." She set down her sewing and crossed the room and sat beside him, and he put his arm around her in the uncomplicated way of two people who have practiced this enough to know exactly where they fit. And they sat together in the winter quiet and listened to the wind doing its theatrical thing, and both of them were exactly where they meant to be. William's second birthday, in March of 1886, was marked with a cake that Rosa made and that William discovered by putting his entire fist into the center of, which was considered an acceptable approach to birthday cake by everyone present. The house was full. Rosa and several of her boarders, Catherine Marsh, Mayor Holt and his wife, Cal Beaumont, who was getting along much better since his retirement, the Ortega family, who had become firm friends of the Coopers over the years. The room was loud and warm and smelled of coffee and sugar. Seth stood at the edge of the gathering with William on his shoulder. The child had decided that his preferred altitude was as high as possible, and Seth had accommodated this, watching the room with an expression that Stella, from across the gathering, recognized and cataloged beside all the other expressions she had learned of his. This one meant, "I built this. Not alone, with you, and I cannot believe we are here." She raised her glass of water at him from across the room. He smiled. In the summer of 1886, Stella told Seth she was expecting again. This time she told him the same day she knew. She had decided that waiting was an unnecessary exercise in restraint that served no one. She told him in the kitchen, with William hanging off his knee and demanding a cracker, and Seth absorbed the news with a smile that started in his eyes and worked its way outward, slow and brilliant, and he said, "All right, good, that is very good." "You are pleased," she said. "I'm extremely pleased," he said. "William, your mother has excellent news." William said something emphatic and uninterpretable, and Seth handed him a cracker and looked at Stella with that same complete, unconstrained wonder. "Another Cooper," he said. "God help the world," she said, and he laughed out loud, which was still one of her favorite sounds. The second child arrived in February of 1887, in a much shorter and considerably less dramatic delivery than the first, which Dr. Walsh noted with professional satisfaction. The child was a girl, small and pink, and already in her first hours of life, possessed of an expression of extreme judgment that made Seth say she looked like Stella making up her mind about something. "That is the finest thing you have ever said to me," Stella told him. They named her Rosa Clara because it meant clear and bright, and Rosa because the woman who had been their first friend and most consistent support in Dusty Creek deserved to hear her name carried forward into the next generation of the family she had helped build. Rosa, upon being told, went very quiet for a moment, and then sat down at her kitchen table and cried in the honest, generous way of a person who does not cry often and means it entirely when she does. Stella sat beside her and held her hand and did not say anything, because nothing needed to be said. Clara was, as her father had predicted, very much like her mother, decisive, observant, and entirely comfortable with her own opinions. She and William, despite the 2-year gap between them, formed an alliance from the very beginning that their parents found alternately charming and alarming, because what they agreed on they pursued with complete unified determination. The railroad reached Dusty Creek in 1888, on a spring morning that was warm and clear, and attended by what seemed like the entire population of the county, with a brass band that had been imported from the county seat, and a speech from the railroad representative that went on considerably longer than anyone's patience for it. Seth stood at the edge of the crowd in his sheriff's capacity, keeping a professional eye on the day, but Stella could see the way he was taking it in, the thing that meant, this town is real now, this is permanent, this is something. She found him afterward, when the crowd had dispersed, and the children had been collected by Rosa for the afternoon, and they stood together on the platform looking at the gleaming rails that stretched off into the distance and connected Dusty Creek to everything else. "6 years ago," he said, "I rode into this town on a horse with $60 and a very bad conscience. And now," she said. "And now," he said, "I am the sheriff of the place I intend to stay in for the rest of my life, and my wife is the best teacher in West Texas, and I have 2 children who terrify me in the best possible way." He looked at her. "And I own a good horse, and I have significantly improved my conscience." She laughed. "Those are significant improvements." "I think so," he said. He took her hand. "I want you to know something," he said, "something I have been trying to put into words for a while. Tell me. You are the reason all of it is possible," he said. I do not mean that in the way of a man who is giving a woman credit he should take for himself. I mean that the specific version of me that is capable of building this life of staying and choosing and building. That version of me was made possible by you, not created by you, but made possible. You believed that I could be this before I was certain I could, and you did not make a big performance of believing it. You just kept showing up and being honest with me, and that was enough. That was what I needed." She was quiet for a moment. The rails caught the afternoon light. "You did the work," she said. "Yes," he said, "but you gave me a reason to." She turned to him and took both his hands and stood there in the spring afternoon looking at the man who was the first to do both, the first to leave and then the first to stay, the first to nearly break her trust completely, and then prove that trust was not, in fact, broken. The first to show her that the shape of a man could change when given the right conditions, and that she had been the right conditions, and that she had been worth being the right conditions for. "I love you," she said. "I know," he said, and then, because he understood she had meant it with the fullness she said it with, "I love you, completely and without reservation, for the rest of my life." The summer of 1888 was long and bright, and William Cooper, now 3, decided that he wanted to be a lawman like his father, which Seth took in with remarkable composure for a man who simultaneously found it the most flattering and most alarming development of his parenting life. Stella told her son that being a lawman was an excellent ambition, and also that being a doctor or a schoolteacher or a farmer were equally excellent ambitions, and that he had considerable time to decide, and William considered this information with the serious deliberation he brought to everything, and then said he wanted to be all of those things, which his father told him was ambitious, and his mother told him was perfectly reasonable. Clara, at 16 months, had 3 words and a comprehensive system of gestures that she used with such precision that communication was rarely a problem. She had also mastered the art of the exact expression at the exact moment, which had made Rosa declare that she was going to be formidable. "She already is," Seth had said. "She gets it from her mother," Stella had said. "That is what I just said," Seth had said. Rosa's boarding house celebrated its 20th year in business in the fall of 1888, and the town threw her a party that was, by Dusty Creek standards, extravagant. There was food and music, and a handmade quilt from the Women's Society that had been in the works for months. Rosa stood in the center of it looking slightly overwhelmed and completely happy, and Stella stood beside her and thought about the woman who had said, the first night, that everyone ate at her table, and who had meant it as literally and as fully as it had sounded. "You changed my life," Stella told her, quiet enough that it was just between them. "When I came here, I had a job and 2 carpet bags and very little else. You gave me a table to sit at and people to know and the beginning of everything." Rosa patted her hand. "You did the rest," she said. "We did the rest," Stella said. The winter of 1888 brought the first real cold snap that Stella could remember since her early days in Dusty Creek, the kind that frosted the windows and made the stove essential, and turned the plain outside into something that looked like a painting of itself. Seth and William spent a Saturday afternoon splitting wood, William's contribution being largely ceremonial, but entirely enthusiastic, and Stella stood at the kitchen window watching them with Clara on her hip, both of them in the warm light of the house looking out at the cold. It was such a simple thing. A man and a small boy in the cold, doing the ordinary work of winter preparation, with the clean sound of the axe and William's voice asking something that made Seth stop and crouch down to answer at eye level, the way he always did with the children, always at their level, always taking the question seriously, as though it had never occurred to him to treat a child's curiosity as anything less than real. She had said goodbye to men who left. She had said hello to men who stayed. He was the first to do both, to nearly leave, and then to choose, firmly and finally to stay. To choose her and this town and this life with the full knowledge of what choosing cost and what it built. She pressed her cheek briefly to Clara's soft hair and felt the warmth of the house around her, and watched her husband crouch in the snow to answer her son's question. And she thought about all the ways a life can surprise you when you stop bracing for it to disappoint you. She knocked on the window glass, and Seth looked up, and across the frost and the distance he smiled at her. It was the same smile she had been learning for 6 years, and she was still learning it, and she thought she would be learning it for the rest of her life, and this was not a problem. This was the best possible thing. In the spring of 1889, Stella Kingsley Cooper, schoolteacher, wife, mother, and woman who had built herself a life out of stubborn intention and the willingness to trust one more time, planted a garden behind the house at the edge of town that she and Seth had been adding to steadily since their marriage. She put in herbs she had learned the names of from Elena Ortega, and vegetables she knew from her own childhood, and at the far corner, 3 rose bushes, because she had decided the house needed color and the color should be deliberate. Seth came out in the afternoon to find her on her knees in the dirt with her hands black to the wrist, and he crouched beside her and looked at the rose bushes with the evaluating expression he brought to anything structural. "They will take a year to really establish," she said. 2, maybe, he said. "I have time," she said. He looked at her sideways with the half-smile she loved. "We have time," he said. "Yes," she said. "We have time." William appeared in the garden with a stick and a conviction that he was helping, and Seth stood up and redirected him with the patience of a man who has accepted that parenthood is largely a process of creative redirection. Clara was with Rosa for the afternoon, which meant the afternoon had the particular quality of things being very slightly quieter than usual. Stella sat back on her heels and looked at the garden and the house and the piece of Texas sky above it, enormous and blue and full of the promise that skies make in spring. 6 years ago she had been in Abilene, bracing herself against disappointment and constructing very careful walls. Now she was here, with dirt on her hands and a son redirecting his destructive energy under his father's supervision, and roses in the ground that would bloom next year and the year after that. She had built this strange, beautiful, complicated life. She had built it out of one brave decision and a considerable amount of stubborn hope, and she would go on building it. Seth came and stood beside her garden and looked at her looking at it, and she could feel him there without turning that particular presence that she had memorized the way you memorize a landscape that matters to you, the one you navigate by. "Stella," he said. She looked up at him, shielding her eyes from the afternoon light. "Thank you," he said. It was simple and without performance. "For staying, for not walking away when you had every reason to." "You had every reason to as well," she said. "You found better reasons." "So did you," he said. She stood up and brushed the dirt from her hands and stood in front of him in the spring afternoon, and she thought about all the goodbyes she had survived and all the hellos that had followed them, and this man, this life, this town, these children, these rose bushes was what all of it had been pointing toward, though she had not known it while she was inside it. "We did this right," she said. "Eventually," he said. "We got there," she said. "We did," he agreed. And he took her dirty hand in his clean one, and they stood in the garden they were building together, and the Texas afternoon held them in its long, golden, unhurried light, and everything that had been unresolved was resolved, and everything that had been uncertain was certain, and everything that had been feared was over, and what remained was this: a man who had stayed, a woman who had let him, and a life that was entirely, completely, unreservedly theirs. The rose bushes bloomed the following spring, red against the pale wood of the house, and the railroad brought new families to Dusty Creek every month, and William Cooper decided definitively at age 5 that he was going to be a school teacher, which his mother declared the best news she had ever received, and his father seconded with the genuine pride of a man who understood that this was exactly right. Clara Cooper at 2.5 had opinions about everything, and communicated them clearly to anyone within range, and the town of Dusty Creek had long since decided that the Cooper family was part of what made the place worth being. Stella taught school for 30 years in Dusty Creek, through the railroad era and the growth years, and the slow, steady transformation of a frontier town into something more settled and more permanent. Seth wore the sheriff's star for 22 years, until his hands reminded him he had given them enough to carry, and he retired to the garden, and to Cal Beaumont's old habit of sitting on the porch watching the town go by with the satisfaction of a man who had earned his rest. They had one more child after Clara, another boy, born in 1891, who they named James, because Stella had decided that giving the name to something living and loved was a better resolution than letting it sit in the shadow of grief. James Cooper grew up to be a rancher, quiet and capable, with his father's eyes and his mother's stubbornness, and this was considered by everyone who knew the family to be an excellent combination. The house at the edge of town with the rose bushes and the porch and the kitchen window where Stella had stood watching Seth and William in the snow became, over the years, the kind of house that a town accumulates its stories around. The place where the door was always open, where Rosa had dinner on special occasions that were really any occasion she felt like calling special, where the children of Dusty Creek came to learn things beyond arithmetic and spelling, about fairness and steadiness, and what it looked like when two people chose each other and meant it. Seth Cooper, on the evening of their 20th wedding anniversary, sat on that porch with his wife beside him in the July warmth and said, "I have been trying to count how many days we have had together." 7,300 and something, Stella said without hesitation. He looked at her. "You counted." "I am a school teacher," she said. "I count things." And every one of them," she said, "was worth every difficult thing that came before it." She turned to look at him in the evening light, older now, both of them, but recognizably themselves, recognizably the people who had nearly collided in a dusty creek street in October of 1883 and had been finding their way toward each other ever since. "Every goodbye I ever said prepared me to mean the hello that mattered." He was quiet for a long moment, in the way that meant he was holding something carefully. Then he said, "I thought about leaving once. I had a ticket. I was going to protect you by going away." "I know," she said. "I was there." "I want you to know," he said, "that even in the moment I thought about it, even then I knew it was wrong. I knew that leaving was not protecting you, it was protecting myself from the fear of you being hurt, and those are not the same thing." "No," she said, "they are not." "I chose to stay," he said. "Every day after that I have chosen to stay. I want you to know that it has never been a difficult choice. Not once." She leaned her head against his shoulder in the comfortable way of 20 years. The mountains were visible in the distance in the last of the light, doing the thing they did, sitting there, patient and permanent, like everything she had been hoping for. "Seth Cooper," she said quietly, "you are the best man I have ever known." "Stella Cooper," he said and kissed the top of her head, "you are the reason I became him." And Dusty Creek went on around them, full and alive and theirs, and the porch held them, and the evening held the porch, and the great open Texas sky held everything, and it was enough, it was more than enough, it was everything.